This is Oddie Tubby. Thank you for choosing to listen to Griffin's Dream by Benjamin Mahoney. This audiobook was produced for your listening pleasure, and we hope that you enjoy it. If you appreciate the author's work, we kindly encourage you to support him by subscribing to the channel and leaving a like or comment to show your support. Your feedback means a lot to us and helps us to continue producing high-quality content for your enjoyment. Thank you for listening. Chapter 1. Amos kept his silence, feeling stumped that Emily, who had just completed her college in pursuit of a pharmaceutical course, was not aware of her plight. The ghastly findings looked grave on her. "Dad!" Emily wiggled her arms to release some tension in her joints. The asylum put her in a straitjacket, considering her a danger to everyone, including herself. She waited, tears already forming in her eyes. "Dad, look at me," she whispered. With his palm partially covering his face, Amos turned to look at his daughter. "Please trust me on this, Dad. It may look bad, but you must not accept Arunth's offer." "We ran out of options, Emily." Amos's voice quivered. He drew a deep breath. "Your fingerprints were all over the power drill, which tore through the eyes and brains of—" Amos drew in another deep breath. "Are you aware of it at all?" There was a hint of anger mixed with anguish in his words. "Or was it that you were still in your dream when you held your weapon?" "Dad, I was there to prevent the accident. I saw it in my dream." "And your diary? You were supposed to keep it for me." Emily moved again, this time shifting her bottom, hoping to get a more comfortable position in the straitjacket. "I have given it to the defense counsel." "What?" Emily shook her head, and frowning, she almost shouted. "No! No!" "You recorded your account of what took place in your diary. I don't—" Amos broke down. His left hand went up again, covering his face as he shook his head. Emily was visibly shaken. "No, Dad. Take it back. You shouldn't have— I thought you understood me." The lawyer said they could use the diary to support their motion to plead insanity. "I am not insane." Emily raised her voice and then leveled her gaze at her father. "My diary, they are private. Nobody should have it. Dad, look at me. You know that I am not mad. I'm not crazy. You of all people. Dad, my dreams and the foretelling are nothing new to you." The bidirectional doors to the room creaked open, and in came an elderly lady in a wheelchair, accompanied by Kelvin. "Nana," Emily said. "Mother!" Doddleweed nodded without looking at Amos, and there was grimness in her face. "For goodness sake, do you need to keep this poor child all bound up?" "I have no control, Mother. She's under court-ordered psychiatric examination remand, and in case you still didn't notice it, this is not a spa center." Doddleweed ignored her son. Instead, she turned her gaze at the medical warden and demanded he let Emily out of her straitjacket. "Please unbound her. This is crazy. She will not go anywhere with me here." The warden, a brawny middle-aged man with a well-trimmed goatee, smiled at Doddleweed. He stood still with his arms folded, with no intention of taking any order from anyone in the room. "Mother," Amos interjected, "don't be ridiculous." "Go on, release her." Doddleweed was resolute when she commanded. "She will not go anywhere, and as long as I am here with her, she is under my judicial watch." Though a retired judge and in her 70s, Doddleweed gave an order as though the room was her courtroom. The warden, who was aware of Doddleweed being a retired judge, finally acquiesced to her demand and released Emily. "My poor child," Doddleweed smiled. A gentle maternal simper came on her lips. "I wish there's more I could do about your situation." Immediately, Emily gave Doddleweed a hug and kissed her on her cheek. "Nana, you should not have come." They held hands and looked at each other for a brief moment. Then Emily went close to Doddleweed and whispered into her ear. Doddleweed's eyes widened as she listened to Emily and made a cursory glance at Amos as she continued to listen. As soon as Emily stopped whispering, Doddleweed reflected for a short moment and said, "Amos, you have to return the diary to her. Whichever lawyer is going to represent her doesn't need that diary. If she has already been sent here for psychiatric assessment, the court already decided to treat this case as a possible insanity case pending the evaluation. Until then, the diary should remain with you for safekeeping. But, knowing you, I believe the diary is still with you. If you don't trust yourself enough, you can pass it to me. I shall find her a lawyer. You can tell that a runth of yours we are quite capable of taking care of your family. Dottleweed turned to face Emily again. Do you know who is the judge presiding over your case? Mom, it does not matter who presided, but you shouldn't be seen talking to any of the judges who are involved with her case. I may be retired, but I am well aware of the boundaries still. No need to lecture me regarding my turf, said Dottleweed. Amos scudded out of the room in a huff. Dad! Emily called after him. She was not fast enough as Amos was already out of the door. Dottleweed raised her hand to stop Emily from trying to shout louder. Let him go, she growled. He just cannot stand the sight of me. Nana, Dad meant well, she said in a hesitant tone, and I'm worried for him. You're on the verge of being charged with such a serious crime, and you are worried about your father? Dottleweed shook her head. My dear girl, seems like you are the epitome of blissful ignorance. Nana, I fear for my dad's life. You still having those strange dreams? Dottleweed asked. I am. In the dream I saw a bald eagle flying among the vultures near a swamp. It was a strange sight. As far as I've heard of apex bird of prey habit, they don't mix, even with its kind, they're solitary birds. What did the eagle do? Nothing much except for the spiral descent that was accompanied by the vultures. I felt the dizzying fall and I got up because of it. The strangest thing was that I had that same dream repeatedly. How many times? 3 times, back-to-back in consecutive nights. That is strange indeed. Dottleweed's voice came out as scratchy, and the tone sounded 1 pitch above normal. I think this particular dream of yours needs an interpreter or someone who can feel the same vibes as you do to interpret them. The puffing on Emily's lower eyelids looked prominent. She stared blankly out of the window. What about those dreams where you see people encountering death? I'm not having them recently, Emily said as she studied her grandma's face. Timing! Dottleweed shook her head. I know, Emily said and halted in midway in what she had wanted to say. There was a sudden chill. Both Emily and Dottleweed felt it. At the periphery of Emily's visual boundary, she thought she saw the shadowy figure of a jackal's head, a shifting umbra cast by the goateed warden on the wall. It was discernible for a brief moment, but Emily was not sure if her visual perception was playing tricks on her. Did you feel something? Emily asked. Dottleweed nodded. I'm afraid, Nana. I'm so frightened. She put her head next to her granny and sighed. I miss my mother. I'm not sure if I could survive another loss. Dottleweed hugged Emily. He's a stubborn man, but fortunately not a stupid one. You must have faith in him to do the right thing. As for the unhallowed, we must be on guard, putting our faith in our God who will protect us. Chapter 2. Emily sat at a table among 3 other inmates who were about to have their dinner. There were 6 dining tables. Each could easily accommodate 14 persons. There were no chairs but only benches available in the dining area. A sound policy adapted by the asylum as inmates found it harder in using the benches as weapons. The dining room was well lit. With Halloween around the corner, there were decorative lights and pumpkins plastered on the walls, and cotton cobwebs with fake spiders adorning the room. Emily noticed that the wardens and nurses sat and dined with the inmates. Gruesome, a nonchalant but courteous lad, sat to the right of Emily, as he was instructed to be a shadow for Emily for the entire assessment process. Though he sported a brawny look as far as his composure was concerned, he had a soft and kind face. A man of few words, he was a pleasant company. The staff at the asylum were allowed to eat the food provided by the kitchen. Since Drusen brought his own sandwich, he didn't help himself at the serving bar. The main menu for that evening were tuna wrap roll or chicken schnitzel with potatoes. For their side dish, the inmates may select coleslaw or Brussels sprouts. On the opposite of Emily sat a young lad clad in Boston Celtics jersey, a green singlet with the number 4 plastered on it. He had on his plate the schnitzel and a generous serving of Brussels sprouts, which looked more like a green pool of vegetables with the chicken on top of it. Emily stared at the sprouts curiously and looked at her own tuna roll, bundled up in some kind of food wrapper made up of wax paper lined with aluminum foil. Green. You like green? Emily flashed a smile when Reese caught her staring at his food. Want some? Reese asked. Emily shook her head. No thanks, she said, her face spotting a faint blush. Reese took 2 sprouts and flicked them gently with just the right amount of force, sending the green balls into the air and then landing on the top edge of the stainless steel plate, rolling smoothly on plate's groove. Emily flinched, and her eyes widened before she stood up and said, "Wow, can you do that again?" "I would not encourage him if I were you," Drusen said, giving her a disapproving stare. Reese smiled and said, "Sure, I can see Rita is constipated." He took another 2 sprouts and flicked them with incredible finesse, sending the vegetable over a good 10 feet distance onto Rita's plate. Rita lifted her head slowly to determine who just gave her the sprouts, her glassy eyes scanning to the left and then rested on someone to the right of her. Seemingly at a loss, she said, "See what I mean?" Her voice slurred while she stared at the person. I'm not crazy. These 2 sprouts just appeared on my plate out of thin air. I'm not crazy." Emily clapped excitedly. "Oh my goodness, I've never seen such an adroit maneuvering ever. You have to showcase your talent, I don't know. America's Got Talent?" She was loud. Drusen stood up. "Emily, please sit down before they find some reason to tone you down." Okay, Emily replied, taking her seat again. Reese looked at her smugly and grinned. "Tell me, lady, if you want to see more of what I can do." Emily lifted her hands and waved several times, signaling that she needed no more performance from Reese. She turned to glare at Drusen and said, "Really? You guys will just arbitrarily use drugs?" "Well," Drusen shot a fake and sarcastic grin, "we've 18 inmates here. Though they may not be prisoners, these buddies of yours are not a flock of doves. Hey, not a nice thing to say. I'm not crazy. And I can assure you everyone here has the same sentiments about themselves. Some even claim to be saner than the staffs here." Emily took a deep breath and, without looking at anyone else, decided to check her untouched tuna roll. "All right, finish up your food. Your first assessment is just minutes away." Emily ate her meal and saw it did get rowdy from time to time when some of the diners had different ideas about taking their meal. There was one who decidedly ate with the food all lined up on the bare floor, causing quite a stir when the warden told him it was against the rules and unhygienic, too. She also learned it was that man's first day in the asylum. Then there was another who insisted on pouring her glass of water onto another person's main dish, giving reason she had every right to do it for being stared at. Emily saw, too, one who seemed adamant on turning the TV to a maximum volume before he would start to eat. As for Reese, he continued being busy impressing anyone with his throwing skills, sending vegetables to anyone else who looked a bit constipated. It was quite a circus at times during the meal, and it was certainly never a dull moment for the wardens and herself as an observer. To Emily's surprise, dessert was included in the evening meal. They had chocolate ice cream balls. Just as she suspected, Reese was tempted with anything round. Reese was seen arguing with the serving bar warden about how many ice cream balls he could have. Emily loved the dessert, although she thought it would have been even better had they left them in the freezer until just before serving them. "Don't be too happy. These treats only are available in the month of October. There were volunteer groups who supplied the inmates with lovely desserts only in this month, in the tradition of Oktoberfest by the community here," Drusen said. "Well, don't intend to stay long if that's what you're getting at." Drusen stared hard at Emily. "Hey, don't get all nasty on me. I've no foul bone in me." Emily glared again at Drusen, but eventually smiled and gobbled up the last bit of her dessert. Chapter 3. After dinner, the warden led Emily to the assessment room. There was a big window overlooking a green field in the room. It was the first unprotected, or rather a window without grill, which Emily saw in the asylum. Drusen pushed the button on the intercommunication panel. The mic on the panel crackled. "Hello, Dr. Gaudet. I have Emily Norbanus with me in the consultation room." "Oh, hello, Drusen. I should not be long." After a brief moment, the door opened and a young man walked in. "Hi, I'm Dr. Gaudet." Emily nodded and said, "Hi, I'm Emily, and this gentleman here is my Han Solo." "Really? I thought he was Yoda." Both laughed, and Drusen smiled. "This will be the first of the 5 sessions which you will be having," Dr. Gaudet said, and his bright, round, marbled-looking eyes seemed to smile when he spoke. Please have a seat and make yourself comfortable." Emily stood quietly beside the chair, Drusen to her right. "I have here a file stating that you were at the crime scene, Mr. Roberts' residence." "I didn't take his life," Emily said while she remained standing. I can understand where you're coming from. The doctor's voice was kind and gentle. You have also consented to be in the Rhode Island Mental Health Institute for the assessment, even though the institute can only assign a male warden to you. Yes, the main facility has female warden, but it's just too far away. I just want to be near to my dad. I shall be back after the session is over, Drusen interrupted as he was about to leave. Could you kindly remove her jacket? But, Dr. Godet? There will be no drama here, the doctor said. Drusen reluctantly removed the straitjacket. Emily's lips creased into a sweet and appreciative smile and slowly sat in front of the doctor. Thank you. I won't disappoint you. Great. First time here? Coming here. I'll try not making a habit out of it, Emily said. Both laughed again. Dr. Godet took out his device and tapped on an app. Emily glanced at him and then at the device. Now, I would like to inform you that you are being recorded. All recordings will not be used for training purposes. It is just a requirement to facilitate in the assessment. I will have an extra audio recording for easy access to our conversation. I would like to assure you that everything you say here will not be admissible to the court of law. So, apart from the indemnity I have just mentioned, do you have anything you need me to clarify? Emily moved her head gently from side to side. All right. This session is to gain an understanding of your cognitive grasp of your socio-interaction capacity and also to assess the state of your mind. You will be asked a series of questions, to which you need to answer as close as you can to whatever that hits you when a particular question is asked. Answer them as quickly as a thought comes to your mind. Simple? Emily nodded. For the record, state your name and age. Emily Elisa Norbanus, 22 years old, Emily said. Siblings? One, older, died from melioidosis infection when he was 11 years. Dr. Godet frowned, bit his lower lip quietly, and then said, Oh, I'm sorry. Your parents must be devastated. Emily nodded, her eyes focused at some greenery at the far end of an oval outside the window. I wish I was the one, the doctor gasped, wondering what would life have been like with an older brother? Or a younger sister or brother, for that matter. My late mother had phobias of childbirth. She stopped after having me. Oh, that is most unfortunate for you, and I'm sorry to hear about your mom. How old were you? 3 years ago, exactly today. Oh, dear. The doctor drew in a long breath. I'm sorry again. You must have gone through a lot lately. Emily was quiet and did not say anything. She shifted her body. Hobbies? Painting, dipping in the pool, and skydiving. How many times have you skydived? None. Dr. Godet laughed and then said, But something I would want to do, but not necessarily having the means. You got me there. Right. It was Dr. Godet's turn, shifting his posture to ease the tension. He then said, The questions I'm going to ask next will sound quite strange, and remember to answer them as the answer pops up in your mind. The doctor paused before continuing. If you are given a choice between 5 fingers and 6 fingers on each hand, which would you choose and why? My mind is used to 5 fingers. 6 is a crowd. Dr. Godet laughed and continued. If your boyfriend's sexual orientation was known to you, would you accept a homosexual as your future spouse? Emily snickered and said abruptly, What if my partner is a woman? Then would you accept your partner if she were straight? The doctor asked. I'm not suggesting that my partner is a woman. I'm just curious where the question is heading to. We're just watching your responses and not determining your sexual orientations. For the record, I'm not a lesbian, said Emily. Dr. Godet smiled and said, Don't worry about it. There was a brief pause. How would you describe yourself? Prurient, straight-laced, or chaste? Prurient. If given a choice among a lion, a snake, and a horse as a pet, which of the 3 would you pick? None. When you have to choose between your parents in a hostage situation, which would you pick to save? I offer myself in their place. Emily could not contain her feelings and burst into tears. Dr. Godet offered a box of tissue to Emily. I'm sorry, I should have anticipated and removed the question in light of what you told me earlier about your mom's passing. Dr. Godet was silent for a moment before he continued. Need a bathroom break? Emily shook her head. Her eyes were red and her hand trembled while she continued to wipe the fluids from her nose. I'm all right, let's just carry on. Right. Religion? Creative subjugation. God? Asked the doctor. Just and fair. Calling? Healer. Jesus, said the doctor. I'm his sheep. Napoleon? Shorty. Bud, huh? I want to be him. Interest? To be the First Lady President. Devil. Very real. Hey, I wanted to say, that is a great ambition. President of the USA. Emily smiled and felt some heat on her face. Reincarnation? Hearsay. If there were such thing as reincarnation, which animal would you rather be? A jackal, a vulture, or an eagle? Emily suddenly became silent and looked at Dr. Godet. The sudden silence in the room made the humming of an adjacent condenser became apparent. I would go for death. Rebirth would be such a cruel... Emily searched her mind before completing her words by saying, reality. Her face became pale and much of the color left her lips. Emily scanned to look around for any sign of the strange sighting she saw before, but she saw nothing. You're all right, Emily? Dr. Godet asked. Who are you really? What do you mean? The doctor studied her face closely. You seemed troubled. I'm sorry. I don't feel well all of a sudden. Do you still have many questions? Emily asked softly. She felt the knot in her stomach, thinking about her father and wondering if her dad would be visiting her today. It was 2 days ago when Amos stomped out of the room after arguing with Dawdleweed. As a matter of fact, we're good. We can wrap it up right here. Doctor, Emily called him suddenly, her tone hesitant. Yes, anything? You think I'm insane? If you are thinking of the assessment, we need more information to carefully assess your state of mind. Dr. Godet smiled. But for most homicide-related assessments, normally the patient exhibits full control of their mental capacity, and we are trying to provide evidence of temporary insanity under great duress. But they just refused to believe I was not there to kill the man, but to stop him instead. My dream, all this feels so crazy. All these will be sorted out. Soon enough. But there are things I'm experiencing which I think are quite peculiar to me, things which others have not heard about. Many things? Recount one. As an example, though it is quite a rare, I can hear strange sound effects, some strange tone or notes when some bad things are about to happen. As in some form of premonitory sounding? The doctor said. Something to that effect. That's interesting. What kind of instruments did you hear when it happened? Sounded like string instruments, jangled and high-pitched. When was the last occurrence? Just now. When you asked about reincarnation. I got goosebumps at the nape of my neck and I heard a very low, bass-sounding noise. We've yet to grasp everything about the human mind. There are frequencies the brain might have picked up and, just like a dream, we have visuals playing of what the brain thought up. The audio processing part of your brain might have that capability of playing certain sounds when stimulated. I've read about it, a rare phenomenon. There were cases recorded as well. Emily smiled, impressed by Dr. Godet's familiarity with such obscure phenomenon. How come no one spoke or wrote about it? Maybe those research materials were not published anywhere. They were private papers that I read. I would like to add, too, they did not make it to the mainstream scientific journals as some of the claims made were considered to be a bit on the paranormal level. The doctor bobbed his eyebrows. Such as? Said Emily. As being able to read into the future because there were electromagnetic energy that had traveled through time fissure, allowing some attuned individuals of seeing into the future. In addition, there were even anecdotes of subjects seeing into a past life, some believing them to be reincarnation, but it was thought those with abilities were able to pick up energy vibes that had come from the past, through the postulated time portal, or so-called chrono fissure. Emily nodded, and she cued the doctor to continue on. There is this physicist who postulated that not unlike the Earth's plate, the time continuum experiences great tension and build-up pressure because of gravity pull and interaction amongst celestial objects such as galaxies, constellations, and the stars. Dr. Godet cackled. Now that seems like a crazy idea coming from the scientific community. So this scientist, a professor, his name Mahoney, believed that huge pressure gets some relief from time to time through the cracks in the time continuum. I see. I've never heard of him, but that is quite an interesting idea, Emily added. Professor Mahoney postulated that electromagnetic energy were able to pass through the cracks, and hence some individuals with highly tuned preceptors might pick up those signals and interpret them accordingly. Emily took in a deep breath and nodded her head before smiling and said, That's a mighty interesting which I haven't heard anywhere. She touched her mouth with back of hand and frowned before saying, Did the professor said how long? I mean, when the fissure opens? Not sure. He might have. Perhaps if you want to research more, go search out Professor Madame Langdon. Emily folded her arms, rubbing the tiny bumps on her skin. She shivered and let out an involuntary whimper. All at once, overcome by localized temperature drop, her breath was like miniature fogs blowing out of her nostrils. She looked grave and asked, Do you think it's all right if I make a call to my father? Dr. Godet saw the sudden change in her face, and though he did not himself feel the chill, he felt cold just by looking at Emily. Goosebumps came up on his body as well. Yes, sure. He dug out his cell phone from his pocket and gave it to Emily. Emily punched her dad's number but got a message that the other party was not reachable. Thanks. His cell phone is turned off, unfortunately. What about the office? I don't have his office number. You can get Drusen to track your dad's office number down if you want. Your dad would have left all his contact details during the admission, I should think. Thank you, Emily said, shivering and rubbing the goosebumps on the back of her arms, and her face spotting the look of resignation. Tell you what, let me get the administration to track your dad, and I will let you know what I find, whether I get it or not. Dr. Godet found a blanket in the cupboard and wrapped Emily with it. It can get quite cold here. This should help. To warm you up a bit. Just a bit. He smiled warmly. Then Dr. Godet spoke to Drusen, telling him that it was not necessary to have Emily in a straitjacket going forward. Being the head of the psychiatric department, he had the authority to prescribe what was needed for the patient. He also told Drusen to help Emily track her father's contact down. Chapter 4. Dottleweed pinned a tiny pink butterfly brooch, a 2-year-old gift from her beloved granddaughter. It matched her turquoise silk blouse. She smiled as she gazed at herself in the mirror. She was tall and slender, and for an 80-year-old lady, the only physical weakness she suffered was an injured knee that limited the distance she could walk. She put on a black pearl necklace. The smile did not leave her face as she gently ran the tips of her fingers on the pearls. Dottleweed was thinking of what else might complement her coat, which she was about to put on when she noticed a figure in the mirror standing next to her. She gasped. Her heart raced. She narrowed her eyes, sizing up the lady in the mirror, and said, If you're worried about your poor daughter, you should pay her a visit instead of me. She surely misses you very much, I do say. I'm trying my best to get her out of trouble, and right now, you're just delaying me from meeting someone who might be able to assist. The lady in the mirror had sunken cheeks, dark eyes, and was in her 40s. As I have said many times, I can't hear you, and my counterpart in the mirror isn't generous as far as the sharing of her thoughts is concerned. Your intruding into my life is getting insipidly tiresome. Dottleweed adjusted the lapel of her coat, which she had just put on, still staring into the mirror, determined to ignore the extra head in there. She rushed to her wheelchair and accidentally stepped on her walking stick, which was in the middle of her path. Losing her balance, Dottleweed lunged and toddled forward, and as she tried to avert her fall, she caught hold of the armrest of the wheelchair. The wheels were not locked. The motion of her fall propelled the wheelchair and herself on a forward skid towards the open window in her room, as though she was surfboarding on a chair. Dottleweed screamed when she was thrown out of the opened window as the wheelchair hit the wall. She miraculously caught hold of the window curtain, keeping herself from plunging 20 feet to the ground. "Kelvin!" she screamed. The curtain ripped with the sound of rings popping off at the seam. Then there was loud banging when Kelvin kicked the room's door as hard as he could. Kelvin ran and caught hold of her hand in the nick of time. "Whoa, steady, steady," Kelvin said as he dragged Dottleweed back into the room. Thank you, I've never been so afraid for my life, ever," she said. Seeing blood on her shoulder, Kelvin said, "Let me see." He then gently palpated her neck, which caused her to grimace. "I'm taking you to the doctor. Might be broken collarbone," said Kelvin. "My ankle, too," cried the old woman. Amos rushed to Emma Pendleton Bradley Hospital when he got a message from Kelvin. It was the end of October. The leaves had already started to change in color, and the air was frigid that day. Amos got out of the car at the car park and immediately regretted not taking his winter coat along. He rubbed his hands together vigorously and blew into them before fishing for his cell phone, his pocket. Having not been positioned deep in his pocket, The device fell, knocking on the curb of the sidewalk and shattered. "Damn!" Amos grunted as he bent down to gather what was left of the phone. He looked up skyward, shook his head. "You dislike me that much? Have you not sent enough miseries into my life?" He slammed the phone onto the ground and walked into the building. Amos found his mom in the ward with Kelvin. Her eyes was close. He approached the bed quietly and gently took hold of his mother's right hand. Dottleweed let out a whimper, and popping her eyes opened, she looked at Amos. Though the painkiller dulled much of the pain she was experiencing, the movement induced a jab of renewed raw agony near her collarbone. "Oh, sorry, Mom. I should have been more careful," Amos said. He grimaced. Dottleweed winced and then smiled. "Don't be silly." Tears started to bead at the corner of her eyes. "Nothing compared to the one you hit me with when we first met. What's a little sting? To feel the love of my son? I'll do it again." The son walked to the left of Dottleweed and kissed her head. "I'm sorry, Mom. All the mess in my life is not helping." Amos wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. He gently rubbed on her left arm and said, "I do love you very much, Mom. Always. And you." "What has the doctor said so far?" Amos said, breaking a brief silence. "Other than their plan to bury a steel plate into my bone to aid its healing, I should be back on my feet within 8 to 10 weeks. Takes a bit longer because of my age, but he said I should be able to pass." "What about your ankle?" "I was told, just sprained and bruises, but there is no need for any surgery. He said some good old-fashioned painkiller will do the trick." "A tough cookie as always," Amos said. "How is Emily?" "I was about to see Judge Abendaniah this morning, but unfortunately I ended up here. And I'm still puzzled as to why on the serpent's head my walking stick was on the floor." "You must have accidentally dropped it without realizing. Anyway, I was on my way to look for Emily when I got Kelvin's call." "Can you please call the judge for me? I just remembered I have not told her that I can't see her." "Your phone?" "At home. Just use your phone. I know her number by heart." "I just wrecked it in the parking lot, unfortunately." Amos turned and looked at Kelvin. "Here, take mine," said Kelvin. "Thank you," Amos said. He turned and faced Dottleweed again, but frowned. "Hey, did you say her name was Abendaniah, my friend who is a judge, yes. That was the same judge my director was telling me about. He knew her too, said that she had come on board his worship group, something like that." Dottleweed had her eyes shut, but she was listening attentively. When she heard what Amos had just said, she shifted her body and grimaced. She opened her eyes and stared at Amos. "Really?" She frowned. "Emily begged me to talk to you about that boss of yours. She was worried heaps about you and your entanglement with your manager or director or what you may call him. She said about Arunth, I think. Arunth. Yati. No, I think Arunth Dati. You are to steer clear of him." "Why would she do that? She hardly knew him." Amos let out a sigh. "He is a saint in Griffin. He made a lot of, I would dare to say, tangible deeds. Good ones, contributing to the local community." Dottleweed's face changed. She turned towards Kelvin and nodded. He left the room. "Sometimes," she said, "there are more to it than meets the eyes. Sounds cliché, I know, but it is the intangible which we know not, that will haunt us if we are not on guard. Your daughter has sixth sense as much as you would like to deny it. She has been given to us for a reason. But, Mother, Abendaniah is your friend. Just because she knew Aranth, you will now decide she is a suspect? I live in the physical world, and logics to me are matter-bound. They are tangible, concrete, and I find it hard to put any shape on what Emily has in her mind. I love her, but that does not mean I am unwilling to accept the fact that she might have some issues. She needs help. There are a lot of things you don't know about your ancestral line, Amos. I see things too. I've never told you all because that's what I fear, that you people would label me as crazy. I saw them when I was a young girl and I still do. It did not stop me from becoming a judge. For a good 25 years, I was able to function as a coherent and competent judge. Just because your daughter possesses abilities which you cannot put a handle on does not mean she's crazy." The door opened, and a nurse wheeled in a bed. "Excuse me, Judge Norbanus. The operating theater is ready, and I will take you there." She gently scanned the tag on Dottleweed's left wrist, and the readout on the portable device displayed an image of Dottleweed, the operating theater room listed as OT4, and the orthopedic doctor who was going to work on her injuries came up as Dr. Ina Hopper. Also, the known contraindicated drugs were listed in the system. Dottleweed was allergic to all strains of penicillin. "This is my beloved son, Amos." Dottleweed smiled as she looked at the nurse. "Yes, Judge Norbanus. Amos can wait here in the room or the ops waiting room adjacent to the operating theater." Dottleweed looked at Amos and said, "Don't wait for me. I might still be knocked out from anesthesia when I'm out of the OT. Go, get Emily. She needs a loving and supportive father. Tell her Nana loves her and not to worry. I'll be all right. Kelvin will watch over me." Chapter 5. It was 4 in the morning when Emily's eyes darted repeatedly, swinging left and right underneath the eyelids. Emily found herself standing next to her grandmother at the moment when the patient had been wheeled into the room. At that moment, as with many of her dreams, she was merely observing the scene without having any emotional reaction to them. Even though she might have known the participants of her dream, she had mastered the skill of not having any feelings for them. Whether it should have been fear, delight, anger, or rage, she stifled them all. The indifference mastery took some time, and the determination paid off, providing her opportunities to witness her dreams for a longer time. The moment emotion seeped into Emily's mind in her dream state, she would be pushed out of her dream. In this dream, she saw a semi-conscious Dottleweed lying on a hospital bed. There were gauze and bandages on her right shoulder. As an invisible observer, she would follow along in the scene that was being played out. Emily saw the ward and the surrounding and knew at once her Nana was in Emma Pendleton Bradley Hospital. She saw Kelvin checking on Dottleweed momentarily and then decidedly went away. A nurse came into the room to check on Dottleweed's vitals. She recorded the blood pressure readings, her body temperature, and her pulse on the medical chart at the foot of her bed. The colleague of the nurse called after her from the open door. "Farah, I was not able to administer her fentanyl. Could you please do it for me? It's intravenous. The doctor ordered for it to be administered as soon as possible. Oh, and hook her to the monitoring system as well, please." Farah grunted, her displeasure barely audible when she turned and looked at the direction of the door. Her hand was holding on to a syringe which she had found in her pocket. She had taken that syringe filled with medication from another room. She made a mental note to return it after attending to Dottleweed. Her mobile suddenly rang. Farah immediately put the syringe onto the stainless kidney dish and took her call. "Yeah, we can do the movie. I'm off tonight and tomorrow for the whole day. I'm all yours, darling." Farah cackled. Knowing that the patient in the room was still heavily sedated, she took liberty at not keeping her voice down and her excitement for that matter. "Farah, don't forget the fentanyl," someone said again. "It is in the dish." Farah covered her phone and yelled back at the other nurse. "Don't worry, I just need to take this call for a short while." "But the Nurses Guild policy, would you rather do it yourself?" Farah retorted. "Get a life, you dumb twit," she muttered to herself under her breath. Then she continued her conversation with the other party on the phone, her other free hand searching for the syringe in the stainless kidney dish. Without reading the label on the syringe and assuming it was Dottleweed's intravenous medication, and while gripping the Android device between her cheek and shoulder to free her hand for positioning the catheter, Farah plunged the syringe into the peripheral venous catheter while she was busy chatting away on her phone. Her call finally ended, and she left the room, forgetting to hook Dottleweed to the monitoring devices in the suite. Though the syringe had fentanyl in it, and the same strength and dose, through her carelessness, Farah had contaminated the needle with traces of penicillin when she plugged into the wrong bottle of medicine earlier. The minute amount of penicillin from the needle that had flushed into the judge's bloodstream started to take effect. Her lips grew to double their normal size. Her windpipe swelled as well, narrowing the airways, causing her difficulty in breathing. Hives started to form all over her body. Dottleweed rocked her upper torso in an effort to breathe, but instead she gagged and coughed. Both endeavors seemed like futile and unproductive efforts. Her heart raced. Her blood pressure dropped as her blood vessels dilated. Her saliva gland became active and copious fluid drained out of her mouth involuntarily. Some fluid backflowed into the wrong channel, causing huge spasm, her face turning dark blue from her struggling to breathe. Dottleweed tried to scream, but no sound seemed to escape her mouth, as her voice box swelled so much that what little air her lungs could draw in found difficulty in vibrating the swollen cords, which were already almost as hard as a rock. The patient kicked, flailed her arms frantically, but to no avail. She was drowning quickly in the fluid that had flooded her lungs. Finally, she lay motionless. The monitoring system, which was supposed to warn the medical staff over a blue code situation, failed for the very fact that it was not attached. Emily struggled to get out of her dream. She let her guard down, and a flood of emotion washed over her. She screamed, "Nana!" and got up, panting, and her neck was dripping wet from her perspiration. She remembered the date and time when she saw the medical chart which Farah used for recording down the latest vitals of her Nana. The date was 31st October, Thursday, and the time for the entry was 11:25 a.m. She looked at her watch. It was 31st October and only 4:25 a.m. Emily ran through her thoughts, searching for a solution to get the message out that her grandma was in mortal danger. I need to save Nana. Getting through to anyone would be a tough act. Telling anyone about her dream in the asylum would be a futile thing to do, a place where strange dreams and crazy ideas were staples and favorite pastime activities of the inmates there. Chances were, her story will only reinforce their judgment about her. Best-case scenario was to escape and be there herself. Emily was alone in her room. The door of her cell was locked from outside. What are my possible options? She thought. Her heart raced, thinking about her grandmother. Emily went through a list of what she could recall from the moment she stepped into the asylum, reflecting on all she had seen so far. Mumbling aloud what she had observed. She said, 2 activity rooms, 2 passageways, 1 fire exit, 2 fire alarm, pull stations, 8 wardens at all times, 4 men, inclusive of Druson's 6 CCTV dining tables, benches, 2 doctors, including Dr. Gaudet, 2 nurses, 18 inmates, 1 extremely talented ball thrower, 6 ceiling fans, 24 fluorescent tubes, 4 bulbs mounted on wall within reach, 5 toilets. The room's height, 20 feet, at least 1 drug dispensary, 2 control rooms, 15 windows, all reinforced with mesh steel bars, 2 therapy or interview rooms with unsecured windows, 3 main meals, 2 tea breaks, 2 1/2 miles to Nana, 30 minutes brisk walk. A countdown from 6 hours for any meaningful intervention. Emily furrowed her brow and gazed off into the distance, lost in thought. After a few moments, she slowly shut her eyes and took a deep breath, as if trying to block out the outside world. Her mind raced with possibilities and consequences as she weighed her options. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she opened her eyes and let out a quiet sigh. With a small nod, she affirmed the decision she had made, a sense of determination and resolve. Chapter 6. I'm Narina, said a bulky and close-to-necklace-looking woman with a monotonous voice. What happened to Druson? Emily was already looking out for Druson. Go take your bath, Narina said, ignoring Emily's question. This is your fresh set of clothing. She tossed a set of gowns to Emily. She had a strange gait, rocking to the left and right as she strode on. Hey there, Emily said. Do you happen to have any disposable underwear that I could use? Narina turned around to look at Emily and said, We run out of them. Usually your family is supposed to bring some undies for you to change. Luckily, we did not run out of fresh hospital garb. Otherwise, you would just need to wear what you are wearing now. Anyway, the last thing you need to worry about is undies in this place. Emily grunted and let out a hard sigh. When she reached the bathing hall, she hesitated when she was asked to strip. After some prodding and reassurance from Narina, she took off her clothing. She took her bath in the presence of Narina along with some other inmates. Then she was led to an assembly where everyone was to do a 30-minute exercise. It was a strange sight to behold. Some of them were drooling and some even looked catatonic while the warden cajoled the inmates into doing aerobics with music blasting away in the background. At breakfast time, Narina and the other wardens herded the assembly to the dining area. Not being able to keep her mind off the recent dream, Emily ran through the list of possible ideas for her rescue mission. At first, she mulled over the idea of telling her father about her dream, should he visit. She was not sure if he would see her, and it would be too late if he came later than 2:30 p.m. From the look of it, she thought the option of getting her dad to help would be too risky. Her father was inclined to believe she had an unsound mind. The meal was served just as it was at dinner time, with inmates queuing up at the serving bar where wardens dished out food, and the inmates could pick up from 2 to 3 different choices of dishes. That morning, 2 choices were available to her. There were egg muffin with hash browns and oats porridge with nuts. Emily was so happy when she saw wax paper lined with an aluminum wrapper on the egg muffin. She ordered the muffin and got a glass of milk for her drink. There was mini chocolate jelly ball made up of firm gelatin, and she took a few since they had no objection to extra servings being taken. Narina told Emily earlier she could sit anywhere. She also told her that Drusen was not in for the day, and she would escort Emily to her second session once she was ready. Narina, unlike Drusen, did not make a habit of eating with the inmates, and so Emily was told not to expect her company. Just perfect. Narina is not sitting with me, thought the young girl. It was 8:45 a.m. when everyone sat at the table with their food. Emily scanned the room and was happy to see a man in green with a number 4 on the back of his jersey. She wondered if Reese ever changed his clothing or he had a few of the same jersey. She stood up and went over with her food. Good morning. Hey, lady, you want to see how I could send your rolls to another table? No, I need to eat them, but, Emily said with a playful expression, I have a more challenging proposal for you. She laughed and whispered into Reese's ear. Reese cackled. It was loud and funny, one where someone might mistake there was a donkey in their midst. Many looked at him and Emily. Shh! You are drawing too much attention to us, Emily said. Don't you shush me. I can laugh like a hyena if I want to, cluck like the chicken if I so choose, scream like the crazy inmates here if I want to. No one tell Reese to quiet down or not to laugh the way he sees fit. He was even louder, and Emily realized her plan with Reese might just be difficult with his strange antics. Hey, girl, enjoying playing with the hornet's nest? Narina asked, using the same dull and monotonous voice, and turning her gaze towards Reese, she said, Reese, missing your Haldol so early? Don't you hit me with your Haldol. I don't want no Haldol, Reese shouted. I can't shoot well with that crap that you shoot me with, you wicked bitch. I suggest you tone down, otherwise this lovely mama bitch of yours will give you darling doll. You hear me? A mother load of it. Emily stared at Narina wide-eyed. She removed the wrapper and started on her muffin when all of a sudden hell broke loose. Reese took the chocolate jelly ball and threw them one after another onto the CCTV camera with incredible precision, smearing the CCTV lens. He jumped onto the table, picking up plates and flung them toward the cameras, damaging all the 3 in the hall. He threw one of the plates at Narina with so much force that it broke and nearly knocked her unconscious. Reese was very fast and accurate. Following his lead, the rest of the inmates went crazy as well. Some overturned the tables and some danced on the tables. Emily pushed one of the benches next to the wall and reached for the exposed light bulb with a hand tower she found from the bar and unscrewed it. She lined the bottom of the bulb with the aluminum wrapper she harvested earlier from her muffin and quickly replaced the bulb back into the socket. She ran and flipped the switch for the bulb. A loud pop came from the bulb before the room plunged into darkness. The wardens were too busy trying to control the unruly mobs to have noticed what the girl did. In the midst of the chaos, Emily snuck into the drug dispensary room, took syringes and bottles of psychotic medical vials, put on a lab gown that was left hanging on a chair, and rushed out of the room. Emily ran to the side where the fire alarm pull station was situated near to the exit door. She broke the thin protective plastic cover that prevents accidental access and pulled the lever, her first attempt ever in triggering a fire alarm. A sense of conflicted feelings weighed in her heart for doing such a thing, but she knew she didn't have a lot of options available. The strobe warning lights came alive with the alarm wailing and ringing, creating a melee. True to Emily's prediction, the alarm system was integrated to the electrically powered electromagnetic locks on the doors. Therefore, when the alarm was triggered, it sent a signal to the security subsystem to release all the locked doors in the affected building, needing no access card to open any of the doors. Everything went as she envisioned them unfolding. With all the din, Emily evaded detection and slipped out through the main door. Her watch displayed 9:38 a.m. as she cleared the building. Emma headed for Pendleton Bradley Hospital. I need at least 50 minutes to get to Nana, she thought. Without any delay, she moved along Warren Avenue, heading west towards Almquist Street. She took off her light pink hospital pants, stuffing them into one of the neighborhood's rubbish bins along the road, as the overall white coat was good enough to keep her modestly attired, looking like any lab staff in the medical center. Hurriedly, she plied southbound along Pawtucket Avenue. Her heart raced, her feet drummed along the sidewalk, her head raced through various scenarios of a possible encounter. It was 10:19 a.m. when she was about to cross over Merritt Street. A maroon Hyundai Santa Fe suddenly cut into her path, stopping right in front of Emily. "Emily!" Amos shouted as he got out of the car. "What are you doing here?" Emily froze, her face all pale upon seeing her father. "Nana! Nana!" Emily cried. "How on earth they let you out and why the white coverall?" Amos was already holding on to Emily's arm, directing her to get into the car. "I am taking you back to the center. Dad, I tried calling you." "You mean the police are done with you?" "Ah, that's not possible. I would have heard from the lawyer." "Nana, please, Dad, stop!" Emily screamed. "For once, just listen. Listen to me. I dreamt—" "You listen, Emily. Enough of your dreams. I have had enough of those dreams of yours," Amos shouted as he continued to drive along Pawtucket Avenue, heading north toward the mental asylum facility. Emily grabbed on the wheel, turning it clockwise with all her might, causing the Santa Fe to hit the curb and mount up onto the sidewalk, hitting a small shrub before Amos slammed on the brakes. "Nana is in the hospital, and Farah, the nurse, will accidentally inject penicillin into her." Amos looked alarmed. "Who told you about Nana?" "No one but my dream, which you refused to listen or believe. Listen for once. She will be out of the OT before 11:25 a.m., and a nurse by the name of Farah will accidentally inject the wrong medication into her. Grandma is allergic to penicillin." Amos stared blankly ahead of the car and did not say anything. "At least just check out on her before you take me back to the mental asylum. Just to see if Farah the nurse is attending to her after 11:25 a.m. Please go before it is too late. Remind them Nana will go into anaphylactic shock from penicillin." The time was 10:27 a.m. Amos turned and stared at the vehicle dashboard. Emily and her dreams had started it all. The death of an innocent man, her fingerprints all over the drilling machine, Doddleweed's getting ready this morning to see her judge friend, all of them were a web of interlinked footprints that were traceable to some dreams. All originated from none other than his dear Emily. Amos palmed his face, shaking his head slowly. "This is utter madness, Emily. What am I to do with you?" Emily opened the door and was about to run out of the car when Amos reached and grabbed hold of her, wrenching her back to the seat. "All right?" Amos was loud, and his booming voice made Emily cringe. "We go and see Nana just to prove what all this madness is, to prove that you have to start living and not engaging in that fantasy of yours. Thereafter, I will take you back to the asylum." Chapter 7. Amos and Emily made it to the waiting lounge little after 10:31 a.m. Kelvin was there. They exchanged greetings, but the mood was as expected, somber and tense. Doddleweed was already in her 70s, an age with higher risk for any kind of surgery, no matter how minor it was. There was a beverage dispenser in the waiting lounge. Amos got Kelvin a drink and for himself, hot coffee. Emily declined his offer for a drink. Finally, at 10:46 a.m., the OT door swung open and the nurse wheeled Doddleweed through. Extremely drowsy, she tried to open her eyes, but the pair of lids were like bricks. She smiled a little when she heard Emily's voice. "Everything went well," said Dr. Hopper. "She should be all good. 8 to 10 weeks, probably." "Thank you, Dr. Hopper. How big is the metal plate?" "Just a thin, tiny titanium plate, a metal well tolerated by the body. Nothing to worry about." "Need removal?" Amos asked. No need to." The confident, good-looking doctor, probably in his 30s, said, "We wanted to minimize surgery as much as we could, especially for her age." "You have—" Emily pulled her dad to the side and shook her head. "Don't say anything. I want you to see for yourself what I saw in my dream." "Yes, anything?" said the doctor. No," replied Amos. "I will check on her this evening. She should be all right. I will get the nurse to administer some painkiller intravenously." "Thanks," said Amos. The doctor turned to the nurse, wrote on Doddleweed's medical record with a prescription for fentanyl, and instructed the nurse to administer it when Doddleweed woke up. Emily grasped Amos and whispered to him, "Just watch. I told you about the intravenous painkiller as per the doctor's instruction." Amos glanced and nodded. Everyone followed the bed to Dottleweed's ward. "Can I get you some food?" Kelvin offered. "Just thought of getting some brunch." "No thanks, I'm all right." "Emily?" Amos said. Emily shook her head. Kelvin nodded, and then went away. Mimi, the attending nurse, prepared fentanyl in a syringe and placed it in the stainless kidney dish. She worked quietly, ignoring both Emily and Amos, who were sitting in the same room. The nurse left the room without administering the painkiller, as Dottleweed was still highly sedated. Emily kept glancing at her watch as the minute hand started moving nearer to 15 minutes past 11. At 18 minutes past the hour, another nurse came in. Emily touched her dad's shoulder. Her breathing quickened. Amos's heart raced as well. He tilted his body, neck propped, and kept looking at the nurse's name tag. He saw Organ instead of Farah. Farah went about her work just as quietly as the previous nurse. She gave a nod and smile when her eyes met Emily's or Amos's. She took all the vitals and recorded them on the medical chart on front of the bed. Amos rose from his chair, walked quietly to check the chart. The recording was as described by Emily. "Farah!" Amos stood up, shocked to hear that name for the first time from another person. The voice came from the door. It was Mimi, the nurse they met earlier. "I was not able to administer the fentanyl. Could you please do it for me? It's intravenous. Doctor ordered for it to be administered ASAP." Word for word as described by Emily, the instruction came in from Mimi. Amos's brows creased. Emily nodded and smiled and put up her finger to signal to her dad to wait because there was more to come. Both saw how Farah looked flustered as she turned to look at the door. Amos saw Farah taking out another syringe and a spent vial, placing it into the dish when her phone rang. The nurse walked out to take her call. That was when the chain of events described by Emily diverged. Mimi came to check on Dottleweed. She was still drowsy but moved a bit more than earlier. Mimi saw 2 syringes on the dish, took one, and just before she was about to administer the medication into the catheter, Amos shouted, "Hold it!" Mimi, stunned by Amos' loud voice, stopped and looked at him for a moment and said, "The jab is just what the doctor ordered, intravenous painkiller, fentanyl." "But the other nurse placed another syringe into the dish," Amos said. The nurse inspected the vials and the syringes once again. "But—" Amos felt a bit awkward and looked at Emily. "My mother is allergic to penicillin." "Yes, I know about that. Farah must have accidentally left the fentanyl with the same dosage from another patient in the dish." She held up both of the empty vials for Amos to inspect. "Judge Norbanus will be all right, I can assure you." Mimi laughed, and her tone seemed disparaging. Emily felt confused and wondered how the narrative from the dream shifted. She did not know exactly what the other syringe was filled with in the dream, but she thought she could have misread the dream. Maybe there was another drug that was problematic. "Maybe Nana is allergic to—" "I think we have embarrassed ourselves enough," Amos snapped at Emily. "No, please wait. Maybe Nana didn't provide the complete list of what she is allergic to for medication. Maybe her allergy record from her family physician would be more thorough. I believe we did contact the family doctor's office and got the full drug allergy list. It is recorded here that her list is from Dr. Mimi took the medical chart to check for the name. "Dr. Merrican, yes, Dr. Merrican, is that her family doctor?" "That's correct. I'm sorry, we have been in the way. Please go ahead with your task." Amos, already looking annoyed, stared at her daughter. "No, it still does not make sense. Everything is a match, and I know there must be a reason for my—" "Stop, Emily. Just stop." Emily's eyes were red, and she looked away from her dad. "So may I go ahead, or would you rather ask Dr. Hopper to prescribe another type of painkiller?" Emily started to cry and stood to face the window, a window with a vertical blinds that provided some shade from the bright glare. The window overlooked down into the car park as the room was on the 2nd floor in the medical center. She held her breath and gasped when she thought she saw an extra figure reflected in the window, a faint image of her mother. She wiped her tears and took a closer look, but it was gone. "Please go ahead since the drug is not on her allergy list," said Amos, looking cross and apologetic at the same time. Without further delay, Mimi administered the fentanyl into the catheter attached to Dottleweed's tiny left wrist, and then she hurriedly left the room, forgetting to hook the lead to monitor the Dottleweed's heart rate. "Excuse me, nurse," Amos called out after Mimi. Mimi came back in and asked, Yes, Mr. Norbanus. I shall be back in an hour's time to check on the judge. I thought you might have forgotten to put on the monitoring lead for her vital signs. Oh, yes. I will get Farah to work on it shortly. I'm sorry I have to go. Amos shrugged and turned away without saying another word. He went over to see Doddleweed's side and kissed his mom gently. Her eyes seemed to be moving, but the eyelids did not open. Emily? Amos hesitated, not denying that he was at odds with Emily only a moment ago. I'm getting something to eat. Want to come along? I think she should be all right. Emily shook her head slowly without looking at her father. Well, I will get something for you, whether you are eating or not. But you might as well tell me what you want. Otherwise, you might end up with something you don't like. Don't. I'm not hungry, Emily said. Amos grunted and left the room. Amos had barely been away for 2 minutes when Doddleweed started to wheeze. She groaned and hives formed on the needle entry point on her left wrist. Emily realized her dream was being fulfilled and wondered if whatever she did was just a futile attempt to change the situation. She ran to the door and started screaming for the nurses. Help! My grandma is having an anaphylactic reaction to the medication. One of the doctors happened to be near the nurse's station, who was looking at some medical reports, immediately responded when he heard Emily. He ran into the room to check on the patient. The old lady was already gagging at that time with profuse fluid pouring out of her mouth. There were traces of blood in the fluid which came from her swollen voice box. Mimi, Farah, EpiPen stick! Farah ran out of the room to look for the EpiPen, which was a standard standby emergency epinephrine injection pen at the nurse's desk. Once Farah handed the EpiPen to the doctor, he immediately plunged the device onto Doddleweed's thigh for close to 4 seconds before removing it. Doddleweed instantly found relief, and her gasping and coughing started to subside, and within a short moment, calmness returned to her. Amos ran back in the room when he heard all the commotion just as he was about to get into the elevator. He was confused and relieved at the same time with the strange turn of events. Doddleweed whimpered, and her intonation was slurred. Amos, you there? Yes, I'm here. You'll be all right. Look who else is here. Nana, Emily cried, still holding on to Doddleweed's hand. Doddleweed nodded. I know, my sweet child is here all the time. The doctor was still checking on Doddleweed when Amos spoke to him. What's happened, do you know? The doctor's eyes met Amos, and he shrugged before saying, Not sure. He looked every bit as puzzled as Amos. I will get a blood profile on her to see if there were anything else administered. When the doctor saw Emily, his face changed. Hey, you look kind of familiar. They had some kind of breakout situation at the Mental Health Institute at... Emily's mouth quivered and her face was drained of color. She moved over to her father. Your photo was in our medical WhatsApp's chat group and... Doctor, can't you see my grandchild is here to see her injured grandma? Doddleweed cried out. I'm sorry, we were told that this girl by the name of Emily caused major chaos at the Mental Institute at Coastal Medical Center. Things went out of control. She was last seen in the same white lab gown, and according to the news, she took along some strong drugs. Amos looked at Emily, terrified to hear what had just been revealed. Seriously? He searched his daughter's white coverall and found vials and syringes. I think you need to take your daughter back to the Coastal Medical Center. She is a danger to herself and everyone around her. You are not suggesting that my daughter had something to do with the allergic attack, do you? Emily was already crying. No, I took the medication just in case the inmates at the medical center tried to attack me. You have to believe me. I'm here because... Emily bawled loudly. Daddy, you're supposed to trust me, be on my side. What I've said came true and you saw. No way could I give the right name for the nurses and what... Leave my Emily alone. Doddleweed shouted as loud as she could. She did not administer any medication, I'm sure of it. Mother, you were drowsy and would not realize anything. Oh my goodness, you should be ashamed of yourself. What kind of father are you? I have to get security to handle your daughter for the safety of everyone here. Stop! Emily started screaming, her hand carrying the syringe that was loaded with haloperidol. She was looking at the door, planning her escape. Emily, don't do anything silly. You're just getting into deeper trouble. Listen to me. We will sort things out. Just calm down. Nothing is unforgivable, right? Amos said. You just never believe me. Not once, Daddy. Emily was already hysterical. Listen, don't make your grandma worry for you. Put down the syringe. No one needs to get hurt. Just calm down. The doctor signaled the nurse to get security. Nana, I was here to watch over you, not to hurt you. You have to believe me, Emily cried as she looked at Dottleweed. I know, Nana has no doubt, Dottleweed said. No one should touch me, Emily shouted again when the security officer in the medical center came into the room. You have taken my blood, and you should not lay your hands on her until you have proof. Dottleweed seemed to have found her strength and authority. Come here, Emily. I'm an emeritus Judge Norbanus, and I know a possible miscarriage of justice when I see one. Emily is not crazy, and there is no evidence that she tried to harm anyone. Shame on you, Amos, for not protecting your daughter. But have you yet to prove beyond reasonable doubt that she is guilty? No, this is not a matter for a judge or a court. This lady caused a major breakout at Coastal Medical Center, and there are as many as 3 patients who have escaped the asylum. For everyone's safety, officers, please get that lady in the white coverall. The doctor was loud and authoritative, ignoring Dottleweed altogether. Dad, not only your life is in danger, but Nana's too. You just don't see it. All you ever know is how to balance your company's account. Everything has to be balanced right to the last item. That is why you can never believe in me, even though you verified the chain of events I pointed out to you one by one. You don't get it, Dad. You don't. They're everywhere, everywhere. Emily screamed as the security officers were closing in on her. You, Emily shouted as she pointed her finger at the doctor. You are his minion, one by one. Like lemmings, you all will fall. Chapter 8. Madhav was impressed by what was laid before him on the table. A well-preserved codex made up of papyrus quires. Considering himself a respectable, self-made, successful trader, he looked at Dean Crimson with a hard-to-contain exuberance. How will I ever be able to reward you enough? He smiled, a contagious grin that spread quickly to Dean. Dean took much pride in having executed such an incredible enterprise as he gazed at Madhav. Pleasure is mine. Already looking as though covered in the penumbra of ecstasy, Madhav gently ran his fingers along the rough, fibrous surface of the codex. While he was not as well informed as Champollion, a renowned hieroglyphic scholar, he read the words on the surface of the archaic, cryptic inscription displayed right before him. Magnificent! Simply magnificent! Madhav exclaimed suddenly. You might be, I would dare to predict, pleased I was able to get a well-respected scholar, Abdul Malik, to transcribe the Isthar necromancy into contemporary English, Dean said. He was still smiling and pleased while he flicked his index and middle fingers, signaling to his helper to pass the briefcase where the transcribed copy was kept. At that point, Madhav could not contain himself. He grabbed Dean's face and kissed him on his forehead, on his cheek, and then on his lips, saying, You don't know how happy you've made me. His blue eyes were incendiary. I am making you my brother. From today onwards, I consider you my brother, and whatever I have, half of it is yours. Yours, and I mean it. Madhav shook his head as he spoke, signifying his words were not to be taken lightly, his offer void of any frivolity. Dean thought the work he accomplished most certainly deserved accolades from his commissioner, and a handsome reward, but to be inducted into Madhav's family as his brother, and then given such a windfall as to be rewarded with half of Madhav's kingdom, was madness. He swore in his mind there was some exchange of saliva in the brief and unanticipated kissing. A whiff of cinnamon coffee lingered on his tongue, even when he had not taken any coffee for the day. Madhav nodded, putting his massive arms around Dean's shoulder, towering over a man whose height seemed a bit shorter than an average Caucasian, his eyes still tracking that of Dean's. He said, Yes, you don't have to say anything. He swallowed his saliva as though trying to catch his breath in his excitement. You know me well enough that I mean what I say. Dean was stunned, and only began to wonder what in the world was the Isthar Necromancy Codex which he helped to unearth. He was merely a very efficient master facilitator in gathering and forming a group of archaeologists to embark on the search, looking for an ancient scripture. Legend had it, the scripture was buried near a location where the high priestess, Bunaferamun, daughter of Imhotep, was laid to rest. According to the ancient tales, though no one had ever confirmed the veracity of the yarn, the high priestess was supposed to be a lover to her father, an abominable relationship that proved to be abhorrent to the tribe of Israelites who were guests in Egypt. It was, after all, in their holy scripture that the Lord, their God, warned about being cursed should incestuous relations be allowed. At the time Imhotep was the high priest of the ancient kingdom of Egypt, there existed an Israelite by the name of Joseph. Through the blessing of his God, Joseph ascended to a stature of power, a power only next to the king himself. Joseph had wind of Imhotep's intention of introducing a lewd and sensual ceremony as a new form of worship in the Egyptian way of life. He became worried and quickly made an audience with the mighty pharaoh. He told the pharaoh that should such an abominable ceremony be allowed to flourish in the kingdom, God would withdraw his blessings, curse the land, and bring untold misery onto the kingdom. The pharaoh, having seen the favors that Joseph's God had bestowed upon Egypt through the Israelites, acceded to his request and granted him the authority to issue a royal edict decreeing that such a lewd and incestuous practice shall not be introduced in the kingdom. The king told Imhotep only he may continue with their current way of worshipping in the land of Egypt. What the king did infuriated the high priest, who made many attempts to assassinate Joseph. In one of Imhotep's treacherous enterprises, he sent Buneferamun, his one and only daughter, a very beautiful woman, to pay Joseph a visit with a flask of wine made from persimmons, with the intention of a peace offering from Imhotep himself. She put on a very sensual and revealing dress with the intention of seducing Joseph and hoodwinking him into having the wine with her. Joseph was in his quarters about to feast on a gifted bushel of clementines when he was told of Buneferamun's visit. Having no ill feelings for neither Imhotep nor Buneferamun, Joseph welcomed her into his residence and accepted the peace offering gracefully. He told Buneferamun to dine with him on some of the finest clementines one could find in the kingdom. Buneferamun, who had the intention of poisoning Joseph with cyanide, an extract harvested from the apricot seeds, changed her mind when she saw how handsome Joseph was. They enjoyed each other's company on a very cordial basis, with no sexual encounter taking place. Buneferamun even offered to visit Joseph more often before she left his residence. When Imhotep learned of his daughter's inability to carry out her mission, he fell into a terrible rage, thinking that his daughter betrayed him by defiling herself with another man. He was not able to consummate the ritual as laid down in the Isthar necromancy, since the seed of the loin has to a virgin. Imhotep decided to poison her with the same cyanide powder she took with her for Joseph. He regretted his action against his daughter, burying her with the only copy of the Isthar necromancy codex in a secret tomb. He was too distraught to want to have anything to do with the necromancy rituals. It was supposed to bring great power to the person who completed the entire ceremony. According to the ancient beliefs circulated since the time of Imhotep, the Isthar necromancy was the only copy, which Imhotep found in an ancient cave. He was told that by practicing the sacred rites as laid down in the necromancy, he would attain an altered existence, acquire some form of immortality and power, and would reign as a revered deity. The story of the book promising immortality circulated ever since the demise of Buneferamun, inspired many to search for the road to an everlasting life. One only needed to find the treasured codex that was buried with the high priestess Buneferamun.